What makes you happy?
Be yourself, be positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast. We need a paradigm shift if it comes to our economic and social systems. Let us drive this change together. The Just Another Mindset podcast shares inspiration and tangible techniques on how to create seismic shifts in an outdated system, collectively and for individuals alike. My name is Ismael, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or theme that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life. Get encouraged by listening to successful thought leaders, inspiring individuals, and impressive changemakers. Change from within will last and create positive results for all of us. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. Crystal Arnold facilitates transformative experiences. Since graduating from Southern Oregon University in 2007 with a degree in international economics, she has designed and led workshops and educational events. She is a skilled writer and interviewer. More than 100 women are featured on her podcast, Money Wise Women. And in 2017, she became the education director at the Post-Growth Institute. In this episode, we talk about post-growth economy. We discuss why money trauma is so common and yet hardly talked about, and you will hear about offers and needs markets. We elaborate on cash, digital and local currencies, and we discuss which of these can and will be used in a post-growth economy. We discuss our experience of the offers and needs market, and we highlight some beautiful success stories. You will learn about governance, sociocracy, decentralization, and healing social isolation. Wonderful. And with that, Crystal, a warm welcome to the Just Another Mindset podcast. And my first question for you today is, how do you feel and what is on your mind?
Thank you so much for having me. I am feeling well. I went out for my morning walk, and I find that being in nature really helps me ground and start the day and just feel like I am part of this whole ecological web, and hearing the birds and all that's happening throughout the seasons. So I'm feeling well grounded in this place. I am on the unceded lands of Shasta and Tequilma peoples, currently known as Oregon. So I live here in the Rogue Valley, pretty rural place right by the creek, and that's where I am today.
Wonderful. That sounds indeed very grounded, and thank you very much for sharing that energy. And Crystal, is that something that you do almost or even every morning, going out into nature and going for a walk?
I do. I have two dogs, and most every day in the morning and several times throughout the day, I find that, especially being connected online to so many people all day, this really helps me settle into myself and my body.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I suppose we're going to talk about, your positions and your online work in depth in quite a bit. But has nature and has exposing yourself into nature and being close to the ecosystem, has that always been a major component of your life, or when did that start?
Yes, I grew up in Vermont in a very small town of 700 people. So in fact, for the first 5 years of my life, it was just my little sister and I kind of running through the 17 acres that we lived on. We had a couple of ponds. And so I was very much, watching the seasons change, and very intimate with the land, getting to know the rocks. And as I grew older, my area would expand that I would get to explore. So I've always loved being in nature, and have two children who are in elementary school now, and also have chosen education where they can also be outside and connected to the seasons through Waldorf education. So this is something that sustains me and contributes to my vitality and even understanding of the world. And I love looking at systems thinking, and my degree was in international economics, so I find so many parallels to nature and how it informs my thinking about the world and the economy.
No, absolutely. I think there are a lot of similarities if you actually examine economics, psychology, and nature. And maybe, Crystal, we can take that as a little segue, and you could elaborate a little bit on when did economics and psychology became of interest for yourself, and maybe even in that combination.
Yes, great question. So it was the year was 2004. I had just returned from living in Guatemala for a winter, and moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is one of the richest areas in the U.S. Also, incredible natural beauty is what brought me there. And so I happened to get a job at a bank, the Bank of Jackson Hole, as a executive assistant. I was in my early 20s then, and was so fascinated by like micro lending was really, kind of a buzz then, and like, oh, how can we better direct the flow of money in alignment with our values? And so about a month before I had started the job, the CEO of the bank had just been indicted for embezzling $10 million over the previous 10 years. And the auditors had just come in and noticed these irregularities. So one of my first tasks there was to photocopy all this evidence of him basically changing loan documents, falsifying things. I thought, wow, this guy who has kids, a wife, a beautiful mansion in this rich area, it wasn't enough for him. There was something driving him to be there late at night, falsifying these things for a decade, living this lie. And it really got me thinking about the psychology of money. What is enough? What drives these kind of white collar criminals to do this kind of thing? And so it was then I began, I'd taken 2 years of university and then took some time off. So I began taking classes around business, and then finished my degree in economics after that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. And maybe we're going to come to an answer, or maybe we're not going to come to an answer later on the question of what is enough, or what is maybe not enough, if that exists or not. And I would like to use a quote, and I will give a little bit of context also for our audience here. And that is, Crystal, that you gave a speech in front of roughly 400 people at the Hearth Storytelling event in Ashland, Oregon, which you call My Personal Money Story. And I would like to read a quote here, and it says, "Inside each of us are stories about money. These memories are about more than just numbers. Your worth and security are intimately intertwined with how you earn, spend, give, and save money. These tales define success, status, and our very identity. Revealing our intimate money stories takes courage." And I would like to ask you, Crystal, you may share to whichever detail you want to do that. What is your personal money story?
Mm. Thank you for asking. Yes, and I will say there is such power to healing our money trauma through sharing that, because there's a lot of shame wrapped up in that for people. I have done, after I graduated from college, I realized I had over 30,000 US dollars in student loan debt, which is quite common and even on the low side here for us Americans, and no idea how to track my finances. So it was like a very humbling moment of, I basically then took a bookkeeping course from a somatic therapist who kind of wove in the body's intelligence with bookkeeping basics, and then began doing a 6-week workshop series with women that I ran probably close to a dozen times now, for people to share both their relationship to money as well as learn like basics of tracking their finances. Um, so I, like probably many people here where I live in America, weren't given much financial education growing up in school. And we didn't really have very much money growing up. It was a single, my dad was the only one working. And I do remember in fourth grade, the first time I realized maybe we were, more poor than others was like not being able to afford the school picture that morning, being all ready to like get my own personal portrait at the school picture, and my parents kind of fighting about not having the finances to pay for that. So that was kind of an awakening moment, when I was like 8 or 9 years old. And we were comfortable and always had food and a roof over our head and all that, but definitely kind of became aware of class issues as I began to travel the world as a young adult. And I also did door-to-door canvassing when I was like 18 years old, in Vermont and Oregon as well. So that was really formative for me to feel comfortable, like just asking people for money and not taking uh, the no personally. And so I really learned a lot, I think, on the ground in a sense, going door to door, and that was for the Sierra Club and some other environmental nonprofits. So yeah, that's a little about my journey.
No, thank you very much. And it actually just sparked memories because the school picture story is certainly something we did share. My mom was a single provider for us, and there was sometimes definitely not the money to get the school picture. And you talked about money trauma, and I found that tremendously interesting. So maybe if you're willing to talk a little bit about that, maybe from your own perspective, and maybe from kind of the curriculum that you go through with the individuals that you help dealing with their money traumas or dealing with their interaction with money. I would be very interested, where is a good starting point and what is it that you discuss with individuals? Because yes, as you said, I think the US is somewhat supercharged if it comes to student debt and if it comes to different beliefs of money, I may just call it. But I think to a certain extent, a lot of that is also applicable in the UK and other European countries. And I would be very interested on how do you, open up, let's just say, and talk about money and money trauma.
Great question. So passionate about this topic. And first of all, just really the power of moving into our body's wisdom, and maybe listeners take a moment to close your eyes and drop into your body, and maybe even put your hand on your chest or your thighs, and feel, if money was a character to you, what would it be? Just taking a moment to reflect on that. If money were a character in your life, what would it be? And so I find that the subconscious often has a lot of wisdom to share with us when we can stop and drop into our bodies. And then, of course, we have the stories and the lived experiences of being in what I call late stage capitalism, and in its modern form that is very extractive and isolating. And, we've seen an increase in social isolation, not only from kind of our digital rise of the digital space, but then the pandemic exacerbated that even more. So being able to acknowledge that we are part of a web of life, and that we do belong. There's such a core desire in a human to belong, and we see that manifest in all kinds of beautiful ways and all kinds of unhealthy ways where people are yearning for that belonging, to feel the visibility, like they matter and their gifts are important. And so there is that at the heart of a lot of my group facilitation work, is really the inclusivity of helping people feel welcomed. And so maybe I'll pause there. I have some other traumas to speak to, but curious if you'd like to say anything on those points.
No, thank you very much for that exercise, I almost want to call it. And I'm sure we're going to talk about the office and needs markets later on, but I can just confirm that the environments and safe spaces you create with a great gift of giving people individual but also collective spaces to be open and vulnerable and so forth. When we discuss money trauma and difficulties with money, I found it very interesting to what kind of characteristic or what kind of personality do you see if we think about money? And maybe just a thought that came up in my mind. I'm currently staying at a regenerative co-living place in Portugal, which for me is a very interesting transformation or combination of regenerative agriculture and digital work. And last weekend, we in fact had a fairly big conference, which is called Rebuild. It was the second Rebuild, I suppose. And we had 50 plus speakers on the topic of regenerative agriculture. And I met a very interesting character. And he was also a former management consultant, and he today works in breathworks and works with very different topics than what he did before his burnout. And why am I telling this whole context story is he told me when he initially had a burnout and when he left the business world, for him money was evil and business was evil and so many things were evil and bad. And I think this is also part of a money trauma in a way. So I don't know if you have any experience from participants or seekers. I'm not quite sure what you tell the people you work with, but is that a commonality that you either really strive for having all the money, so money is the holy grail, or you go the exact opposite and are like, okay, no, money is evil and business is something that we shall not approach? I oftentimes have the feeling, until you find your own story and you realize to deal with your own money traumas, oftentimes it's this either or approach. It's all or nothing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that pattern over the years, this kind of, what you were describing there feels pretty accurate. And it makes sense with the way our money is designed. It's our money is debt, and it's issued with interest that can never be fully repaid. There's never enough currency in circulation to be repaid because of so inherent in the system is a scarcity, is I feel like a very primal wounding as a result of capitalism, is this feeling that there's not enough. that, well, first of all, that I'm not enough. There's often that we're trying to overcompensate. There may be the imposter syndrome. There may be just a feeling of it's never good enough, no matter how much self-help books I read. There's, a deficiency within me, and then we move out to there's not enough in the world, and this feeling of competition, survival of the fittest, all of these stories and contexts that really drive us to behave in a way which does not always foster the kind of cooperation and empathy that I know you and I are both feel is important to have a culture. And so when we put so much emphasis on money, on growth as our metric of success with our gross domestic product, that measuring those things as our gauge of how successful we are often just leads to a lack of well-being. It's there's a big movement now in the well-being economy, the well-being economic alliance, and redefining what our metrics are for success so that they can be more aligned with the well-being of individuals, of our communities, and our entire ecosystem. So I feel like that has been a result of our fixation on money and the belief that more is better. And so that's part of the shift we're also kind of leading at the Post Growth Institute is redefining if growth is not our metric of success, then what does this world look like?
No, definitely. And we're going to talk definitely in more detail about the Post Growth Institute and also the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And when we just talked about money, another quote, and I'm going to paraphrase here, came to mind. And Charles Eisenstein in Sacred Economics basically talks about the fact that money is a story that we have for now agreed upon, and in the end it's not good and it's not evil, but it's what we make of it. And maybe you could share your thoughts to which regard money is a story we have agreed upon, or maybe also what are new components of the story that we can envision from.
So much there. There's, yes, money is indeed an agreement based on belief and that something is of value, and of course has been designed in many ways over the years, from tokens to beads and different ways that people put value on certain items to facilitate the ease of trade. I also recommend David Graeber's book, Debt, The Last 5,000 Years, I think it's called. Great anthropological look at debt and also kind of the myth of bartering. Like, would that ever really happen, where it was like how for, where a whole society was kind of just on barter? You really need something as a medium of exchange, as well as a store of value. So money and currency plays those both of those roles, which sometimes have conflicting impulses of the store of value and the medium of exchange. So I think it's important to say that we could kind of distinguish those a little bit more. I've been really fascinated by complementary currencies. Things like time banks are big here in the US, and we have a lot of people through these kind of alternative mutual credit systems come through our facilitator training program, helping their communities really make visible what is of value there that maybe hasn't been monetized. So I really feel like there is kind of an awakening to also the power and control that lies in currency creation. I am very wary of the central bank digital currency movement here at the CBDC. And we're seeing legislation passed in the US and different states trying to kind of bring that forth or block it as well. So when we do see states having the control to shut off the finances, say last year in Canada, we saw that with the truckers. I don't know if they called it a protest, but their movement, and then the state was able to say this is an emergency, and we're shutting off the bank accounts of people who are involved. So I find I'm very I feel like a cashless society is in fact very dangerous to the well-being of the people, and further centralizes control and creates less transparency and agency for individuals to manage their lives and make their choices as they would like.
A couple of follow-up questions I have there. The first one, and that's a simple one, just a definition. What is time banking for those listeners who have not heard about the concept?
Thanks for asking. So this was developed by Edgar Kahn, who's since passed away, I believe back in the 70s. It's basically an hour for hour egalitarian trade system. So they do have an online platform. So it's a way where you can exchange services hour for hour. And so it's a complement to the, monetary currency based economic system where people can just kind of come together as peers in a more less hierarchical way and exchange services.
Thank you very much for that elaboration. And you talked about digital currencies and also cashless societies, and I would be very interested in the US. What role does cash play for now? Because in Europe, it's vastly different. In Sweden, I believe by now we are out of cash, whilst in many other European countries, you're still highly dependent on cash. And I think if we open that viewpoint on a global scale, there are some countries who are very interested in getting rid of cash in a way, the Netherlands, Sweden, and so forth. And there are other countries where people are very cautious for different reasons, I suppose, which we may or may not discuss at another point. But what role does cash play in the US or in North America?
Great question. I've been following the work of Catherine Austin Fitts for over a decade now. She was part of the federal US government and basically became a whistleblower. Where's all the money going? And right now she's even saying as a form of just making our stance known about the importance of cash, to like use cash exclusively once a week is like her challenge, just to get in a practice of having it with you, and being able to keep that as a crucial part of our freedom in some way, is to be able to me, it's tracked or connected to the tracking and kind of that surveillance of how and what our activities are, and what that information is being used for as far as tracking our behavior. So there's a lot of layers to that, but I think that's what I'll say for now.
No, and I think one component for now, as we speak, is really this tracking, right? So what is it that Crystal spends her money on? What is it that Ismael spends his money on? But I think one challenge or fear of people is, if we move into fully digitalized monetary systems on a country level, or even on a bigger level than that, is that it would also limit what you can buy with the currency that you get. Let's call it the crystal coin, and you may decide what Ismael can buy or purchase or exchange with this coin. So you may agree that cucumber is something that each and everybody should have access to, whilst tomatoes is something that you do not like, and therefore I shall not be able to buy tomatoes with this coin. I don't know if this is one of the major threats or one of the major concerns you have with digital currencies or full digital currencies? And if there's other things that come up when we talk about that, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Where is the authority and control to make these kinds of moral, societal decisions? And once we give up that agency, it's very difficult to get it back. And we are seeing a continued trend towards centralization and on all levels. Once we, acquiesce some of that power or ability to use cash, for instance, it would be very difficult to have that back. So absolutely that moral control of who's deciding what's a worthy purchase, or what limits you have, or what other factors allow you to be in a good social credit standing, like China's rolling out the kind of social credit scores. And so how does the state get to determine what behavior is acceptable, and how transparent is that process? So I think anything that can continue to empower local communities, whether it's an actual local currency that's used to complement the other types of currency, or just having the network of relationships of who you can depend on, because I can imagine there may be more financial turbulence, and uh, where I feel like anything we can do to kind of have greater agency in our financial lives is important.
No, absolutely. I definitely do agree. And maybe we can circle that back a little bit. And towards the beginning of our conversation, you remember you mentioned the word scarcity, and you also mentioned the workshops where you actually talk and interact with individuals. And I would be very interested to hear, how can we, for ourselves and then with other individuals and then potentially with groups and maybe even states, move from a scarcity mindset towards a more abundance mindset, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's many layers here, and I think I might do this drawing experiment in a moment, which connects to this. I prefer to use kind of the sufficiency, or term enoughness, versus abundance, because a whole lot of something isn't always better. But I do, yeah, that sentiment of how do we move from this feeling of scarcity, and it's very real. Like, I'm not gonna spiritually bypass, like, people are suffering. It's hard for people here in the US and around the world. We're seeing rising energy, food costs, and people are really pressed to make it financially. So I just want to acknowledge that difficulty, and that it's not just about changing our mindset. It's about practices of liberation that can move us out of a colonized mindset and system, which is extracting value. So I feel like there is a very fundamental thing to I'm a part of this summit that's happening right now called decolonizing economics. So really looking at that foundation of how colonization first, takes land from people, steals land, destroys their seeds, their food sources, makes them dependent on the extractive system, where they're often paying um, you know money to the state or the colonizers. So we have all been suffering from this, no matter the color of our skin, or the place that we live. The extractive systems, that the capitalism has been the main tool for colonizers to increase their power. And so we're seeing, huge wealth inequality, and so many people are suffering. So I feel like part of this liberatory practice is not only internal with our own ways of tracking our finances and aligning ourselves with our values as far as, if anyone's here banking with a big bank, that's one easy step you all could do to move your money into a local credit union, or a bank that's locally owned, that will keep the profits there circulating more locally. So it's things like that we really can take action to remove ourselves from the financial system. Another example is when you using your credit card, the merchant is often charged like 3%. And so that's like a hidden money that is going there. So at our local food co-op, if we buy a gift card with cash or a check, they'll give us a 3% discount on that. So it's a way, it's kind of like these hidden things which we may not realize, so looking at how we align our values more with our actions is really important, I feel.
No, absolutely. I definitely do agree. And I think both examples you mentioned are so important. And maybe to just look a little bit deeper on the first one, choosing the bank to do business with, I think this is also one of the easiest and one of the biggest levers that each individual has. Because in the end, if you understand that most of the big banks are somewhat connected with businesses that are at least questionable, I would say. Once you understand that they can only lend money to those big corporations because they have the money from individuals, you have a major lever in your pocket which you can basically play and say, no, I'm not going to give my money to Bank of America or USBC, HSBC, or whichever the company may be, because then they cannot reuse this money to give out loans and to pump growth into an old economic system. So thank you very much for highlighting those two examples. And maybe we can use that a little bit as a segue, Crystal, to talk about the post-growth institute, where you are currently the education director. And I would be very interested in, first of all, what is the Post-Growth Institute and its mission and or vision, and what brought you into this organization?
Yeah, gosh. So I have been here for 6.5 years now as education director. It's been a beautiful experience working with people from around the world. We are an Oregon-based 501c3 nonprofit, and our executive director, Donnie McClurkin, has really been an inspiring voice for decades now, really, around looking beyond growth. And we're kind of unique in that we look at the systems level as economic. How do we get money circulating more in our local communities? Some of the ways I mentioned: credit unions, not-for-profit enterprise, things that don't have the extractive mechanism built in. We give educational talks on debt, on fractional reserve banking, and those kind of big picture things. But then we also really are about creating a new story. We have a fellowship program in its second year that really highlights voices from the global South, many of them female identified people and people of color who are weaving a narrative of more place-based agency and circulation of resources and money. And then, of course, in my area, our kind of flagship program is this Offers and Needs Market event, which I can tell you about more in a moment, and training facilitators that we've trained over 250 facilitators from 26 countries since June of 2020, and find that this is the way to build the culture that we were just talking about, where there is a feeling of enoughness, of belonging, of trust, we see again and again that people through our processes are able to have both more confidence expressing themselves as well as more trust in other people. So it's really an exciting time to be kind of decolonizing a conversation which has been dominated historically largely by kind of the Euro centric North American, largely white male academic voices in kind of degrowth. And so looking at, what does, yes, we need a period of slowing down, this consumption of more and increasing profits and this drive that's baked into the corporate mandate, really. I mean, it's just right there in how corporations are designed that this is their impetus. So we really find that questioning that and and looking at we do live on a finite planet here. So how do we more effectively circulate money, resources, and steward our environment in a way that's more leads to greater well-being. So we do a lot, and that's kind of a big picture of what's going on at Post Growth Institute.
No, thank you very much for sharing that. And I think that gives a very clear and good overview of the Post Growth Institute. And I would be very interested to hear a little bit more about the offers and needs markets. And before we go there, Crystal, I would really like to acknowledge you and your team for everything that you're doing with the Post Growth Institute. And maybe for our audience, it's also very relevant information that we have in fact met during an offers and needs markets facilitator training. So I had the great opportunity and luck and everything to take part in an offers and needs markets training, and it was indeed a very interesting, insightful, and connecting experience with individuals from, basically all over the world, and a nice focus on the global south. So maybe with that context, Crystal, you could tell us a little bit about the offers and needs markets and facilitator trainings and everything you organize around that.
Thank you. This is an ancient way of being. It's just the way humans are together. It's essentially what the economy, in my sense, is a place to come together to care for one another and to acknowledge value, to share our gifts, and to have our needs met. In this very sense, imagine for yourselves when I was in Guatemala, what a lifeblood of the community, the market was, people coming there daily with their mangoes and their textiles that told a story, and there was no price tag on anything. It was like a conversation, that happened that really determined what the exchange would be. So we've seen this again and again, even in times of immense colonization and even after war, that still the marketplace is a place that people are coming together to very essentially meet their human needs. So we've created this specific process called the offers and needs market, but first wanted to acknowledge the kind of ancient indigenous roots of it. So essentially, this is just a 2-hour guided process where community members come together. We were doing it in person. It's been about 13 years since Donnie McClurkin first started developing the process. And now, of course, we do it virtually as well. And so people have a chance to reflect, share, and then connect. And so first they identify what some of their passion, knowledge, skills, resources are, as well as their needs. And then in small rotating groups, imagine sitting around a table with 6 to 8 people, you share your offers first, and you can also determine, is this something with a fixed price that you would like to receive, or is it something you're willing to offer for free, negotiable, or barter? So I find like that makes it distinct from kind of a time bank being purely time oriented, or gift circles that people may have heard of. So it's quite distinct in the way people have agency and safety to, really express what the offer and the cost of it may be. Um, and then we also, as you've experienced, sharing the needs can be very vulnerable. And what's really cool is the creativity that's sparked when people hear other people's needs. And, for instance, like a stay-at-home mom who loves and is cooking a lot and loves food. And maybe I heard this a few years back, a man who, was living alone and wanting to eat healthier. So that was a natural match from him being able to express, I need some help with meal planning, and this mom to feel like, oh, that's something I could work into my life, is provide some value, kind of sell you some foods or meal plans. So I think there's really a creativity and a generativity that happens. People find employment, friendships, and as I said, we've survey after each event and find that it boosts people's self-esteem, positivity, their willingness to volunteer. And really what it's doing is making these things visible so that we can engage and reorient to the market. Oh, this is a safe place where people are listening to me. I'm really able to share, and you know what? It really taps into like the generosity and kindness that I believe, based on my years of experience here in this process, that is at the heart of every human. This generosity, this kindness, this desire to make a meaningful contribution and be acknowledged for that. So we find it really is a beautiful way to heal some of the social isolation that we've all been suffering from to some degree. And yeah, so that's a little bit about it.
No, and I can only confirm it certainly is all that. And as you described, it can be a very vulnerable activity to talk about your needs, especially in regard to economic factors, right? But what I've experienced in our group, I'm not exactly sure how many we were. I would say something between 30 and 40, and you go into smaller breakout rooms of like 5-ish people. And it was vastly interesting to see how quickly, with strangers, we found a very safe space to talk about offers. And offers are somewhat easy to talk about. Everybody knows what he or she is good at. Everybody knows what he or she can offer to a bigger group. But then when it comes to needs, it was surprising and interesting for me that also in those groups, even though we didn't know each other that well, people were well equipped to and had a safe space to actually talk about what their needs are, rather it be employment, rather it be support for technical stuff, rather it would be language courses, or there were so many different examples. And what I also found interesting, just maybe to make that very practical for our audience, is like we basically created a big list where everybody could put down their offers and their needs. And I believe that actually quite a few offers and needs were matched. And maybe that can lead to a question, because Ismael and Crystal can now write down offers and needs. But if we amplify that and make that bigger with 20, 30, 50, 80 people and so forth, there's a great chance that maybe we're not in the same breakout room with the person speaking about the need. But if we just skim through or flip through or even filter through the offers and the needs, there's actually a good chance that Crystal can help Tim, and Tim can help Anna, and Anna can help Ismael, and Ismael can help Crystal. So we're basically forming new narratives and new interconnections between. So I think that is also one of the major benefits of this offers and needs markets. And the question that I want to cue is there any limit to offers and needs markets? And you may answer that as in size, as in people participating, or have you seen or something in mind, services, products that you would say, now that's really difficult to organize via an offers and needs? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Great question. So, to those of you listening who may be community organizers or people who do want to know what are the needs of your community so you can be of better service, there is such a power to having that kind of made visible so that we can be in better service and engage in ways that feel good to us. So I feel like they're really, this is the most adaptable group process that I've ever seen. It is very scalable. I've done it with 100 people in one room at a time, and there is such a natural networking, like you're saying. It may not be someone right at your table or small group, but then you kind of weave the tapestry there through the process. We have Yeah, so people are using it as many of you may imagine, like, oh, how cool this would be to do in your apartment building or your neighborhood block. Wow, we live so close. I, we had we had a big natural disaster here in Southern Oregon in 2020. There was a fire that roared through the town, destroyed thousands of buildings, left a lot of people homeless. It was no electricity for over a week, very smoky. It was like super intense. I lived just a mile or so from that disaster scene. And so naturally, people set up right in that area right near where it burned, a mutual aid station. They had a big board there with the offers, what was there today, and what we need. Oh, people are needing diapers and peanut butter, and so they would post those pictures on social media to kind of show what was there. So people who were wanting to help and bring stuff down in that very urgent and dire situation for people could. So I like to give that example of whether or not a natural disaster is actively happening for you, having these kinds of networks of who you can call on also in your neighborhood is I find extremely important, and helps us like just relax a little and feel a little more safe if we know our neighbors and who we can depend on in a place-based scenario. And of course, people are using this personally for like homeschool groups or artist collectives or conferences that are already happening. How many listeners have gone to a conference? It's so overwhelming sometimes. Who do you want to connect with? There's so much small talk. How do you know who? And so a process like this, as part of a multi-day experience, can really help make it visible. Sometimes people use, like, imagine Post-it notes up on a wall for multiple days, where you can add to it and really identify, oh, I need to talk to Dave about the natural building stuff, and just kind of connect. And I'll give one more example too about let's see, in 2019 here in Southern Oregon at the university, they had a hemp symposium, a multi-day conference, and someone ran an offers and needs market. There were maybe 70 people there. And so we had both medical marijuana growers as well as hemp growers, and they were kind of some tension between those because of the nature of that industry. So the organizer said, wow, it was amazing. It really helped kind of bridge some of those divides in the community. And they were actually, just like I said, putting them up on a Post-it notes on the board, and able to kind of mingle and connect. So we can also see it used within an industry to focus more specifically on professional things, rather than like the couch that you have for free, where people are really speaking on behalf of their business, and ultimately building trust across divides. And I'll say one final point on that, because it is essential in such a polarized world, right? To kind of be able to bridge some of those seeming divides, and that does it really. This does it really well. We've seen it kind of break down some of the assumptions people have about what so and so will share based on their gender or their age, where you can really actually be pleasantly surprised by some of the treasures and talents that people have that you may not expect.
Thank you very much for pointing that out. And what I'm hearing is that offers and needs markets do not only heal social isolation by getting people into rooms, either physically or digitally, but it also has the capacity to heal social tensions in a way, and basically to build bridges between those polarized viewpoints that we experience each and everywhere today, right? In politics, in climate, in so many different things. I think that also goes back to the inequality that we discussed earlier upon. And maybe that is another prompt where we could evaluate a little bit if we talk about this social isolation and the pandemic. Maybe you also have a few best practices or success stories or something that comes to mind when we talk about bringing people together for a common experience, and maybe also what is it that makes facilitating such events such a big
Thank you. Yes. I find just acknowledging the trauma of social isolation is very powerful for any of you listening who are facilitators or convening groups, just acknowledging that. I've just heard from so many people that they experience that social anxiety like never before after this very unnatural period of being isolated. And so it takes those group experiences where you can feel safe, where there's structure, where you feel like the facilitator has a plan, and there is agreements, and there is an inclusivity where people's needs are acknowledged and met to the extent possible. So we feel like that is essential. We are very keen on disability justice is kind of a term that was introduced to me in the past couple of years, and being able to have accessible events, not only for physical disabilities, but also people who may have different ways of thinking, or be on the autism spectrum, or how do we really create safe environments for people to engage. And with that, there's like an emergence. There is I love Adrienne Marie Brown's work. She had the book Emergent Strategy, and then also I'll just show this one, Holding Change. If anyone wants a facilitator's guide, this by Adrienne Marie Brown is brilliant. So how do we go with the emergence of sensing what's happening in the group, of being able to determine, the best, what's being called forth. And so being in these types of experiences where people can express themselves safely, and we use a lot of silence too, like you experienced. Like that's a big eye opener for a lot of people in the training. Is we'll ask a question, and then we'll say, now take 15 seconds of silence to reflect on that, and then we'll ask, would anyone like more time? And then after we've taken that time, we'll ask for people to indicate if they'd like to share. So for that for me is part of decolonizing the group space, is giving people the ability to process at their own pace, and not to feel rushed, and not to have the loudest, most confident extroverts always answering the question before others have gotten a chance to kind of digest things themselves. So I find that these types of experiences where people are feeling heard and valued, and like there's clear ways for them to participate or to pass, that people also can just kind of observe and and feel welcomed in that way. So I feel like that's really healing some of the fear that people have about connecting with others, about expressing themselves, about um, feeling that loneliness and questioning their own worth and value. I have primarily worked with women in my workshops, so that's certainly a common theme that I find coming up for those women is that kind of questioning of the self-worth or your value in the world. So I feel like it's really important to give people a safe space just to try things. You could pitch an offer that maybe you're still like formulating how exactly you would do soup delivery or something, but you could put it out there and like see what people might think. So I feel like we need more places that are, as they say, safe to fail. Like it's okay. It's not like high stress, and we really make an effort to invite the whole person in and not just the mask that you wear when you're the professional at the networking session saying you're available for consultation. We really are like, well, you actually also have an interest in improv theater and might want to, share that with others. So I feel like those are some of the things I've experienced.
That's beautiful. And I know that this might be a dead end, but when we talk about this experimentation and quick feedback loops, do you have any feedback or stories that you can share with us that are very explicit? Okay, there was a person who was a businessman who then did stand-up comedy for joy and also for sharing it with the world. I don't know if you have some examples of exactly that, like doing and offering something that you may not offer to your normal social circles, but where you feel enabled and empowered to maybe also follow your dreams and to say, yeah, you know what, I want to be a clown on a kid's birthday party, or I want to cook for people, or I want to do something that I've never done before. Do you actually have a couple of stories that you're willing to share with us today?
Thanks for asking. There's so many. It's hard to choose. What I will share, it was a really touching experience. It was our first time coming back together for an in-person OANM in, I believe it was 2021. Yes, like summer of 2021. And we Oh, it might have been actually July of 2020, I think. There was an outdoor permaculture gathering. These people had been together for like a week, like 20 people up here in the hills of Oregon, here in the forest. And so they'd already been like working together, eating together. And it was one of the last days. And we did this offers and needs market for them in person outdoors. It was so beautiful, and this young couple was there. They were like living out of their van, home free kind of style, probably in their early 20s. And so I introduced the process, and we moved into reflecting on your offers. And like I always prompt people with a bunch of ideas to get those creativity flowing and then brainstorming. So this young woman got up and walked out into the woods, and I figured she was taking care of something personally she needed to. And after about maybe 15 minutes or so, she finally came back, and I realized that she had been crying, and I like very gently I gave her some space to share. And she said, I just realized I felt like I had nothing of value to offer. She's like, I just feel I don't even know, and this is more common than you may imagine, is that people really have difficulty, identifying what they might even offer. And I assured her, first of all, that, the empathy of, "Ah, I felt that way before too." And it really comes up a lot for people. You're not alone in that. And helped her basically there, she was willing to be, I was like, well, is there anything you love to do that, and she's like, well, I do love animals. Maybe dog sitting or dog walking. I could take care of animals. And that for her was like a huge breakthrough to be able to even come to that point of identifying something as someone who was living home free, young adult, who didn't quite know that much about herself yet. So it was beautiful to see someone, and so also acknowledging that, like, it may be difficult for people who are retired or, a stay-at-home mom, like I was for 5 years. That was like, I remember coming into my first offers and needs market in 2017 after primarily being stay-at-home mom with my two young kids and being like, it was so, yeah, challenging at first to say, well, what do I offer? And then just to be able to give some advice to people there and recommendations and realize that I had things of value was a huge um, breakthrough. And this really connects with what capitalism does, right? It often makes us feel like replaceable, faceless, anonymous cogs in a wheel where we're just doing the one very specific job that we've done our whole lives. And so this kind of breaks some of that down, lets us get more creative.
No, and I find that a beautiful example. And as you said, things of value. And I think it also emphasizes the fact that, this old narrative, as you called it earlier, the late stage capitalism, maybe is so ingrained into our minds that we can't even imagine or believe that we have something worthy, something great to offer, because if you cannot put a price tag on it, then it's not something of value. And I think this is also one of the main key components that the offers and needs market shows. They are things, they are services of value, even if you do not put a price tag on them, right? Like walking a dog or like mowing the lawn. I think there are so many different examples that we could place here. And I think this is also the shift that we've discussed earlier, that if you come from, okay, I cannot give something what is needed by somebody else, but I can basically create something new, which may not be in a traditional understanding needed. It's still things or creations of value, and this is so important. So thank you very much for sharing that example and for pointing that out. And
I'd love to also share this. Can I share this quote? I didn't mention I also had a podcast in 2016 and interviewed about over 100 women. It's called Money Wise Women, and had this woman from a Native American tribe, Siadam Edmo. She's Shoshone, Nez Perce, Yakima, and she is currently executive director of Seeding Justice, which is a philanthropy group here in the Pacific Northwest. And here's what she said about the offers and needs market. She said, the potential, quote, the potential of using the offers and needs market to benefit tribal economies is huge. Modern society separates us while commodifying our work and skills. In traditional tribal communities, there was ceremony in the everyday contributions people made. They didn't have a job separate from their purpose. They lived for a living. The beauty in your process is returning to those original instructions about how we are in community with one another, to treat one another, and to value one another. So again, connecting it with those ancient indigenous roots, that we live for a living, that for them the purpose was not separated from a job. And so integrating more into wholeness ourselves in relation to our communities.
No, this is so powerful, so beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing that, Crystal. And in fact, I have a couple of questions that I ask each and every of my podcast guests. But Crystal, Before we go there, is there anything in regard to money stories, or in regard to the Post Growth Institute, or in regard to the offers in needs markets, or in regard to something completely different that you understand we haven't talked about sufficiently today and that you would like to shine light on?
Hmm. One thing that I would like to highlight is around governance and power structures. And at the Post Growth Institute, we use sociocracy as our governance structure. And I find this to be very effective in kind of creating a more decentralized governance system. And it's based on consent, not consensus. And so the idea is people are bringing proposals and that you can object. And if you have an objection, then like it's kind of up to you to rework it or rewrite it, get specific about what that would take. And so there's a lot to sociocracy. Ted Rao was one of our fellows last year, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Sociocracy for All, and that kind of model of how we ultimately both sociocracy and the offers and needs market are really about bringing out the best in our communities. Um, at at the Post Growth Institute, we also use asset-based approaches. And this is also, as you were saying, in the offers and needs market, we start with the offers. That's a little often more comfortable for people to share. So starting with what's working and building from that rather than, and this applies, these asset-based approaches to communications, to articles, to ways we respond to someone's question about how awful the world is. How can we actually reframe things while acknowledging the difficulty, but starting with what's working, or a more asset-based approach. And so I wanted to highlight those two kind of pillars of our work, as well as draw. I'm also very involved in our fundraising circle, and so I feel like it's also important to distinguish between mutual aid, things where it is peer-to-peer kind of support, and the traditional hierarchical charity models where, oh, there's the people with money and then there's all these people who need things, and the kind of colonized system that we have in philanthropy, which really, you'll come into a poor community and what do you guys need? There's really a kind of a missing part to the agency and dignity of being more asset-based in that approach, and being able to break down some of those one-directional flows of information, of finances, which often lead to like some power and issues of control, as well. So I feel like anything that can bring out the inherent wisdom through, like we were experiencing today, some reflective processes, time for silence, allowing people to engage in a way that's safe to them, instead of these kind of extractive, top-down, hierarchical models, is really important to me and the Institute.
No, absolutely. And that's two very important factors that you're bringing up, is the asset-based one and the decentralization. And in fact, this conversation about mutual aid and philanthropy, or more traditional ways of fundraising, is probably a whole hour by itself, right? And what are the rights for and reasons and benefits and challenges of such. But thank you very much for shining light on that as well. And maybe with that, Crystal, if people would like to reach out to you personally, but also to the Post Growth Institute, where can they find out more and how can they do so?
Great question. Yeah. So people feel free to email me at Crystal, Crystal, at postgrowth.org. And that's also the Institute's website, postgrowth.org. And then you can find about Offers and Needs at offersandneeds.com. And then I can also give you my website for the notes. Money Morphosis with a dash between those is that where you can find all the podcast episodes, and had some really interesting guests over the years. And so those are some ways to reach me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. And Crystal, I have those 3 final questions that I ask all of my podcast guests. And you already talked about this optimistic and can-do angle, and that intertwines nicely with the first of them. And that is the question, what is it that makes you hopeful?
Ah. What makes me hopeful is experiencing the kindness and care of other people, and that creativity of how I feel when I can be of service, when I hear one of my neighbors who needs something. That it gives me hope. The kindness after I had my children and was at home, and that postpartum, people bringing meals. Um, my 9-year-old son just broke his legs skiing, and in December he broke both of his legs, and it was an awful experience, and I was the main kind of caretaker for him here at home, and the kindness of people to show up or bring their children or little gifts or food. I just see that we really want to take care of one another. And so it gives me a lot of hope to see that kind of open up that flow for people. And as well, the transformations that people have, both in our facilitator training as well as in the offers and needs markets themselves. And if anyone wants to experience one, you can. Each month we have an online offers and needs market, and you can find that on the website offersandneeds.com/experience, and register for free. So to hear like those stories about people's realizations about themselves, about the connections they had, so the synchronicities in life give me hope. And I find like paradoxically, we've been planning for synchronicity through the design of the offers and needs market, through the way I, to bring it back to my morning walk on the creek, what is the good I'm expecting? And even when challenging, accidents or deaths or things happen, I can also continue to open to the gifts and synchronicities of life.
It's so powerful. Thank you very much for sharing that, Crystal. And my second question, which also links to that, is, or may link to that, who are your mentors, or whom do you look up personally?
Great question. Well, I have, first of all, learned so much in the last 6+ years at Post Growth Institute, largely with working closely with Donnie McClurkin. I would say he's definitely a mentor in, the way he thinks about things, approaches things, and connects with such integrity and genuine care for people. And I've also really learned a lot from, Mike Strode, my co-facilitator, who you met in the training, the way he shows up and leads his communities in Chicago, largely BIPOC communities, and with his time bank there, I just feel like there is, he's taught me a lot about connecting with the lineage and in our facilitation lineage, how to approach difficult questions, even if you don't have a lot of time in the agenda for them, and the grace with which he shows up. And finally, well, actually, two more. I will say I've been working. So after my son's skiing accident, I approached a woman I've known for a decade, Norma Burton, and she does this journey to completion, this kind of shamanic shadow work. And so I've been on that journey with her. I did it about a decade ago, but so powerful to have those people who are willing to work with the multiple levels of our stories and the healing process. So really grateful for them. And finally, my children. My children teach me so much. They are 9 and 12 years old, and just that seeing my son, that drive to get up and move again. It wasn't something I had to make him do. His innate force of life, like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna get back out there. And so they really teach me too about the inherent generosity and kindness of these kids, and the way they think about others and how they can help. And it's so beautiful to see that in my children as well.
No, absolutely. We can learn so much from children and youth and young adults. So thank you very much. And Crystal, that leads me to the last and final question of today's podcast episodes. And it's a rather hypothetical one. And I call it the three truths. So I would like you to imagine that you're traveling in space all by yourself, actually for quite some time. Could be a couple of months, but it could also be a couple of years. And after all that solo travel, you encounter a human-like species, but they can only process 3 facts or 3 truths about humanity before they decide whether or not they want to get to know us. What is it that you tell them?
Well, firstly, we are children of the earth, and the earth's rhythms and cycles and nutrients, and the way that the mycelium distributes different nutrients across the soil of our earth is deeply part of us and informs the way in which we create. I would also say that the human's capacity to love and to grieve is one of our greatest strengths. Is that as mortals, and that we can and do celebrate those who have come before, and our ancestors, and their memories also live in our blood and our bones and our DNA. And so we are carrying all of that wisdom and trauma of our ancestors, and the way we honor and grieve that which has been lost is part of what makes us uniquely human. And finally, I would say that humans have an incredible ability for empathy, and our emotional intelligence really makes us unique. Our ability to sense what the energy is in others, in the room, and animals. We are very sensory creatures, and we are able to navigate even in disorienting times, when we can tap into that emotional intelligence and relate to other people with loving kindness and care. So humans have a great capacity for compassion and empathy and altruism, doing dangerous things for people you don't even know. That instinct to jump in and pull the stranger out of danger is so strong in humans. So I really find that I would also want them to know about that incredible generosity and kindness and emotional capacity that we have.
I very much like that. The interconnectivity with Earth and the ecosystems as a whole, love, grief, and the wisdom we can get from that. And yeah, really empathy and the possibilities that we have because of such. And with that, Crystal, thank you so much for being a guest on the Just Another Mindset podcast. And if there is any final message or words that you have for our audience today, it's all yours.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Just reminding everyone you are enough. And as you're out there interacting with other people, just kind of noticing how can I be more kind today? How can I be kind to myself? And really let curiosity guide you. You know, what is this other person needing right now, or how may I be of service? So I really believe that we are valuable beyond measure, and I really appreciate this opportunity to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. If you enjoy this podcast and learn from it, please feel free to share this episode with a friend or two, and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please use the next 10 seconds to give the Just Another Mindset podcast a rating, and know that you will help me to create more meaningful content like this, and also that it will help other people to find this content and get inspired as well. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ismaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Do more of what makes you happy.
Be yourself. Positive.
Change.
Just another mindset.